The world above was on fire, but deep under the ruined streets of Berlin, Adolf Hitler opened his eyes to what would be the final morning of his life. The bunker air was cold and heavy. The lights hummed weakly, casting long shadows across the narrow concrete room. Outside, the distant boom of artillery echoed like slow, angry thunder. Dust drifted from the ceiling each time a new explosion hit the city. Berlin had become a skeleton of a city, and everyone inside the bunker knew it. Hitler sat up slowly, moving like an old man who had aged 10 years overnight. His back ached, his hands shook slightly, and his face looked pale under the fluorescent lights. For the first time in years, he looked not like a leader, but like a man trapped by his own decisions. Aide knocked lightly on the door. Mein Führer, the generals are waiting. Hitler nodded, though he already knew what they would say. The night before, the Soviet army had broken through the last defensive lines. Now they were only blocks away. Every hour brought them closer. He walked down the bunker hallway, passing soldiers and staff who avoided eye contact. They stood straight, saluting him out of habit, but their faces were tight with fear. No one had slept. No one felt hope. When Hitler entered the briefing room, the mood dropped even lower. General Krebs unrolled a map on the table. The red arrows showing Soviet positions looked like they were choking the city. Sir, Krebs said quietly, the situation is hopeless. The room tightened. Everyone waited for Hitler's reaction, but he didn't shout. He didn't panic. He simply stared at the map for a long, heavy moment. The war was lost. His empire was collapsing. The sounds of destruction above them were the final proof. Hitler slowly sank into his chair. Then this, he said, almost whispering, is how it ends. No one answered. No one dared to end that moment. Everyone in the bunker understood. The final 24 hours had begun. Hitler remained seated at the briefing table long after the officers stopped talking. The others waited in silence, unsure whether to leave or stay. The bunker seemed even darker than before, as if the walls themselves understood what was coming. Finally, Hitler stood up without a word. His steps were slow, almost unsteady, as he walked back to his private room. The hallway smelled of smoke, metal, and fear. Every few minutes the ground trembled from another explosion above. Inside his room, he closed the door and leaned against it. For years, he had refused to accept the truth, but now, in this cold, gray bunker, the truth came crashing down on him like a weight he could no longer carry. He walked to the small desk where a lamp glowed faintly. Spread across it were maps he had once used to plan a world he believed he could control. Now those same maps were nothing but proof of failure. He picked one up, a map of Berlin. Almost every district was marked in red, showing Soviet positions. He traced a finger along the lines and said quietly to himself, everything gone. For a moment, the sounds of war faded, and the room felt painfully still. Hitler's shoulders dropped. The aura of strength he tried to keep for years had disappeared. He looked tired, not from the war outside, but from the war inside his own mind. A soft knock broke the silence. His secretary, Traudl Junge, stepped in carefully. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from lack of sleep. Sir, is there anything you need? Hitler looked at her for a long time. She had served him loyally for years, typing speeches, letters, and orders. Now she stood before him like someone watching a sinking ship, unable to swim away. No, he said quietly. There is nothing more to be done. She nodded and stepped back, but Hitler stopped her. Traudl, she turned again. Thank you, he said. The words sounded strange coming from him, soft, almost human. Traudl hesitated, then whispered, I hope. I hope this ends soon. Hitler gave a faint, bitter smile. It will. One way or another. She left, and the door clicked shut. Hitler sat down on his bed, staring at the floor. The bunker shook again as another shell exploded above ground. For the first time, he understood with absolute clarity, there was no escape, no miracle, no rescue. The end was not just near, the end had already arrived. The bunker felt smaller as the hours passed, as if the walls were slowly closing in. Hitler remained in his room for a long time, saying nothing, barely moving. Outside, the staff whispered among themselves. Every face carried the same question, how much longer can this last? Around noon, Hitler asked for Eva Braun, the woman who had stayed by his side for years, always in the shadows, never fully seen by the world. When Eva entered the room, She brought with her a strange calmness. She was one of the only people in the bunker who still smiled, even on this hopeless day. "Adolf," she said softly, "you should eat something." He shook his head, then looked at her with an expression she had rarely seen on his face, something almost like guilt. "Eva," he began slowly, "you have given your life to me. I will not let you die without my name." She blinked, surprised. "Are you asking me to marry you?" Hitler nodded once. Eva's eyes glistened. Even in the middle of a collapsing world, she said yes without hesitation. During the ceremony in the shadows a few minutes later, everyone in the bunker was called to a small conference room. The lights flickered as the explosions above continued, shaking dust from the ceiling. A table was pushed aside. 2 candles were lit, their flames trembling with every distant blast. A local city official, trembling from fear and exhaustion, performed the civil ceremony. Eva wore a simple dark dress. Hitler wore his uniform, though even it looked tired and worn. "Do you, Adolf Hitler, take Eva Braun as your wife?" He answered quietly, "Yes." "Do you, Eva Braun, take Adolf Hitler as your husband?" Eva looked at him with a soft smile. "Yes." "Either." A few staff members clapped weakly. Others simply stared at the floor. It was the strangest wedding they had ever seen, 2 people promising a future that none of them believed would last even one more day. Someone brought out a small bottle of cheap champagne. The cork didn't even pop, it fell out with a dull thud. They poured a few glasses. Eva lifted hers first. "Do, uese," she whispered. Hitler nodded but didn't they drink. His hands shook slightly as he held the glass. He set it down untouched. Candle after the wedding. Back in their private rooms, Eva tried to talk about memories, times when they traveled, laughed, or dreamed of quiet days, but the walls shook constantly, and each tremor reminded them of what waited above. Hitler stared ahead, silent and distant. Eva touched his hand gently. "No matter what happens," she said, "I'm staying." He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in hours. Then, he said, "We will face the end together." The bunker trembled again, louder than before, and outside, the Soviet troops were getting closer. The afternoon inside the bunker felt endless. The air grew warmer, sicker, almost difficult to breathe. Every explosion above sent a dull vibration through the walls, like a warning that time was running out. After the brief wedding, Hitler called for his remaining generals and staff. They gathered once again in the main conference room, the same room where, only hours earlier, they had accepted defeat. Everyone looked exhausted. Some had dark circles under their eyes, some had not eaten in days. All of them were waiting for the moment when the Soviets would break through the last line and flood the city streets. Hitler walked in slowly, his uniform hung loosely on him, and his steps were stiff. But the room went silent the moment he entered. He sat at the head of the table and looked at each officer one by one. Brown pushed in the briefing no one wanted. General Krebs pointed at the map again, though nothing had changed since the morning. "Mein Führer. Soviet troops are now 2 streets away. They will reach the Chancellery soon." Hitler nodded, as if he expected nothing less. "Then listen carefully," he said, his voice low but firm. "The officers leaned in my final hours. I order you to continue fighting. Do not surrender. Not now. Not ever." A cold silence settled across the room. They all knew the order made no sense. There was no army left to command, there were no supplies, no reinforcements, no hope, but no one dared to speak against him. Hitler continued, "The people must fight in every street, every corner, every doorway. If Berlin falls, the world must see that we did not give up easily." His words were sharp, but hollow. Even he seemed to know that his commands were nothing more than words disappearing into the smoke-filled air. Memo dictating his final statement. Hitler turned to his secretary, "Trottel Junge, prepare to type," he said. She sat at the typewriter, her fingers trembling over the keys. Hitler began dictating what would become his final political testament. He blamed others for his defeat, his generals, his allies, even the German people. He accepted responsibility for nothing. It was a speech filled with anger, denial, and bitterness. Trottel typed each sentence carefully. Even though she felt sick doing it, she could hear bombs shaking the ground above her feet as she worked. When she finished, Hitler took the papers, looked at them briefly, and signed them with a shaky hand. Candle the weight of the moment. The officers were dismissed. Some saluted, some hesitated, some walked out with haunted eyes, knowing they were witnessing the collapse of a world they once believed would last forever. As the room emptied, a single overhead light flickered. Hitler remained seated for a long moment, staring at the map spread before him, a map that no longer belonged to him. The thunder of artillery rolled across the bunker walls again. The end was not approaching. It was already here. Evening crept into the bunker, though no one could see the sky. There were no windows, no sunset, no sense of time anymore, only the shaking of the ground and the hum of weak electric lights. But inside, the staff tried to keep some kind of routine. They prepared what would become the last dinner Adolf Hitler would ever eat. The kitchen was small, hot, and crowded. Kokona Flagel whispered to another staff member, "Just make something simple. It won't they eat much." They had almost nothing left, no fresh vegetables, no meat, no real spices. Food supplies had been cut off for days. Still, they managed a small plate of pasta with a thin tomato sauce, the only dish Hitler still tolerated. For Knafwith played a strange silence at the table around 7 de la tarde. The staff gathered in the bunker's tiny dining room. Normally, Hitler ate alone, but tonight, for reasons no one understood, he allowed a few people to join him. Eva Braun, Joseph Goebbels and his wife, Magda, a few loyal officers, his secretaries. The room was dimly lit, the tablecloth was wrinkled, the silverware mismatched. Every now and then, dust fell from the ceiling when a bomb struck above. Eva tried to keep the mood light. "It's almost quiet compared to yesterday," she said with a small smile. A moment later, a deafening explosion shook the entire bunker, sending cups rattling across the table. Everyone froze. Eva's smile faded. Hitler didn't react at all. He poked at his food without eating much. His hands moved stiffly, and he looked somewhere far away, lost in his thoughts. Goebbels, desperate to sound calm, asked, "Mein Führer, should we begin evacuation plans for the staff?" Hitler didn't look up. "No. Anyone who wants to leave may go. But I am staying here." A heavy silence followed. No one touched their food. They simply sat, listening to the bombs, the trembling walls, and the steady ticking of a small clock on the wall, counting down the last hours. Hot beverage, coffee and quiet conversations after dinner. Someone brought in weak coffee. Hitler took a sip, then set the cup down. Eva, sitting beside him, asked softly, "Are you tired?" "A little," he answered, but everyone knew he was beyond tired. His face was pale, almost gray. His eyes were sunken, unfocused. Around them, whispered conversations began. "What will happen if the Soviets break in? Will we be captured? Do we run? Do we hide?" No one knew the answer. The bunker felt like a prison now. No exits, no future, no safety. A quiet end to a broken die. As the dinner ended, Hitler stood up slowly. His chair scraped against the floor, echoing through the tense silence. He looked at the people around him, the last circle left in his collapsing world. "Thank you," he said, his voice weak. "You've done your duty." Then he walked out, Eva following a few steps behind him. The others remained at the table, motionless, listening as the bunker shook again. They all felt it. Tomorrow would not come for everyone in that room. Night settled over Berlin, though no one underground could see it. The bunker had no windows, no fresh air, no sign of the world above, only the constant rumble of artillery and the smell of concrete, sweat, and fear. Still, everyone inside felt it. This was the final night. After dinner, Hitler moved slowly down the dim hallway toward his private quarters. His steps were heavy, almost dragging. The once confident stride he carried in public had vanished completely. Eva Braun followed him closely. Her face was pale but calm, as if she had made peace with whatever was coming. Candle goodbyes in the hallway before entering his room. Hitler paused. A few staff members stood nearby, the secretaries, his valet, his remaining officers. He looked at them quietly. His voice was softer than any of them had ever heard. "Thank you," he said. "All of you." Traul Junge, his secretary, swallowed hard. "Sir, what will happen tomorrow?" Hitler hesitated, then answered, "Tomorrow will decide itself." The words sent a cold chill down the hallway. Even those who once saw him as powerful now saw someone completely drained, a man carrying the weight of a collapsing world. One of the officers stepped forward. "Mein Führer, perhaps you should rest." Hitler nodded slightly. "I will." But they all knew rest was impossible. Every few seconds, the ceiling shivered as artillery shells crashed into the streets above. The bunker lights flickered, humming under the pressure of damaged electrical lines. Still, Hitler moved into his room and closed the door gently, as if trying not to disturb anyone. Camera memories and regrets inside. The room was small and plain. A narrow bed. A wooden desk. A fading photo of his dog, Blondie, placed neatly beside a lamp. Hitler sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the picture. Earlier that day, he had ordered the dog to be tested with poison capsules. Blondie had died instantly. Hitler's hand trembled as he touched the frame. For a moment, the man who had caused a global war looked like a lonely, Broken figure, someone facing consequences he could no longer escape. Eva entered quietly, carrying a blanket. You should lie down, she said gently. Hitler nodded but didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the photograph. She was loyal, he whispered. Eva sat beside him, so am I. Her words hung in the silence. Two people, trapped by history, waiting for the same dark ending. Waning crescent moon. The bunker goes silent around midnight. The staff gathered in the hallways, whispering, "What's happening now? Did he go to sleep? Will the Soviets reach us before morning?" Fear clung to them like the dust in the air. Some cried quietly, some simply stared at the floor. Everyone understood the truth. By sunrise, everything would change. Mantelpiece clock, a clock ticking toward the end inside his room. Hitler finally lay back on his bed. He closed his eyes, though sleep didn't come. The ceiling vibrated again. A lamp flickered. Somewhere far above, a building collapsed with a deep, echoing roar. Eva sat nearby, watching him silently. Neither spoke, neither needed to. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking each second, a countdown to a fate already decided. And so the bunker, for the first time in days, grew quiet, almost too quiet. The last night of Adolf Hitler's life had begun. Morning came without sunlight. No dawn, no sky, only the low, rumbling growl of artillery shaking the bunker walls like an angry beast. It was April 30th, 1945, the last day. The bunker lights flickered awake, buzzing softly. In the hallway, staff members moved slowly, their faces pale and hollow. No one said good morning. There was nothing good about it. Inside his room, Hitler opened his eyes. He hadn't slept at all. Eva Braun sat quietly nearby, her hands folded in her lap. She tried to smile when he looked at her, but her lips trembled. Outside the door, a guard knocked gently. Mein Führer, the Soviets are now less than 1 block away. Hitler nodded, as though the information no longer mattered. Collision. Berlin reaches its breaking point above ground. Berlin was collapsing. Soviet tanks rolled through the streets. Flames rose from broken buildings. Gunfire echoed in every direction. The capital of the Third Reich was dying. Inside the bunker, the sound was deafening. Dust fell from the ceiling with each explosion. Sometimes the lights went dark for a full second before blinking back on. Every time the lights flickered, people wondered if this was it, if the bunker was finally collapsing, even though he already knew what it showed. Red everywhere. The Soviets had taken almost all of it. For the first time in hours, Hitler spoke. It is over, he said softly. I will not be captured. Eva walked up behind him. Whatever you choose, she said, I choose it too. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of the moment. She had accepted her fate the moment she came into the bunker. Wilted flower. The last request. Hitler pressed a button, calling his valet. He appeared quickly, nervous, standing stiffly in the doorway. Bring me my pistol, Hitler said. The valet froze for a heartbeat, then nodded and left immediately. Eva took a deep breath, steadying herself. Hitler then called for the doctor and his personal staff. When they arrived, he spoke with a calmness that shocked everyone. I will take my life today. Eva also. Some of the staff gasped, some lowered their heads, some simply stared, unable to process the words. No one tried to stop him. They all knew this moment had been coming for days. Fog. A final walk through the bunker before the final hour. Hitler stepped into the hallway. He walked slowly from room to room, speaking to the few loyal people who had remained. To Goebbels. To Bormann. To his secretaries. To the guards who still stood at their posts, trembling but faithful. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. Thank you for your service. Some saluted, some cried, some couldn't speak at all. Trottel Junge whispered, Sir, is there really no other way? Hitler shook his head. There is no future for me. The hallway fell silent. Black circle. The final decision is set. Hitler returned to his room, Eva walking beside him. There was no fear on her face, only sadness and strange calmness. The bunker shook again, harder than before. A distant roar echoed through the air as another building collapsed above. Hitler closed the door behind them. Only a few minutes remained. He had made his decision, and there was no turning back. Late morning settled over the bunker like a heavy curtain, silent, cold, and final. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone felt it in their bones. Hitler and Eva had gone into their private room and closed the door quietly, almost gently, as if they were simply retiring for rest. But the people outside the door knew better. Inside, the room was dimmed. A single lamp glowed on the desk, casting long, thin shadows across the concrete walls. The air felt tense, thick with the weight of choices that could not be undone. Wilted flower. The final conversation. Hitler stood by the desk, holding the small pistol. The valet I'd given him, his hand shook slightly, but his expression stayed firm. Eva approached him, her steps slow but steady. She looked calm, more calm than anyone outside could imagine. Adolf, she whispered, I'm not afraid. Hitler looked at her. For a moment, something strange passed across his face, something like gratitude, or perhaps relief. You deserve better than this, he said quietly. Eva shook her head. No. He chose this. He chose you. Even now. She reached out and took his hand. For a long time, they stood together in complete silence while the bunker trembled around them. Pill the poison. On the desk lay 2 small capsules. Cyanide. Eva picked one up with delicate fingers, turning it in her hand like a small piece of glass. She looked at Hitler one last time. Will it hurt? She asked softly. He shook his head. It will be fast. Eva gave a faint smile. Sad, gentle, human. Then she lifted the capsule to her lips. Hitler watched without speaking. Eva bit down. A sharp, bitter smell filled the room. Within seconds, she collapsed onto the couch, her breathing stopping almost instantly. The woman who had stayed with him through fame, war, and ruin, was gone. Hitler stared at her for a long, frozen moment. His face didn't change, but his eyes tightened. Whatever remained of the man she knew disappeared behind a wall of finality. Pistolete. Final act. Hitler sat in a chair near the desk. He placed the pistol against his head, his hand now steady, controlled. He straightened his jacket, glanced once more at Eva's still form, and then looked at the photograph of Blondie on the desk. Outside the room, staff members stood in the hallway, silent, frozen, barely breathing. Then, a single, sharp sound. A gunshot, then silence. The bunker seemed to stop shaking for a moment, as if even the war paused to acknowledge the end. The door opens. Minutes passed before anyone dared to move. Finally, 2 guards were ordered to enter. They pushed open the door slowly. Inside, the air was heavy with smoke and poison. Eva lay peacefully on the couch. Hitler sat in the chair, motionless, the pistol on the floor beside him. It was over. The man who had started a world war, the man whose choices had destroyed nations and millions of lives, had died in a silent underground room, far from the world he tried to control. Outside, the staff swallowed their shock. Some cried, some stared in disbelief, some simply turned their faces away, but all of them understood. History had changed in that single, final moment. Inside the bunker, the tension was like a heavy fog. Everyone felt it. Every room was filled with whispers, nervous breaths, and the distant shaking of the ground as Soviet shells struck Berlin. Even the light bulbs flickered as if they were afraid. Hitler sat at his desk again, but this time his face looked older than before, much older. Deep lines cut across his forehead. His eyes were dull, tired, and filled with something close to fear. The man who once controlled half of Europe was now trapped underground, with no hope left. Across from him stood General Krebs and General Bergdorf, waiting for his instructions. They knew what was coming, but none of them dared to speak first. After several silent minutes, Hitler finally said quietly, "It is over. There is no point in continuing." It was the first time his staff heard him speak those words so clearly. Krebs tried to argue. "My Führer, maybe if we negotiate." Hitler shook his head. "No. The Soviets will not negotiate. They want Berlin. And they want me." A chilling silence filled the room. Then, slowly, Hitler reached into a drawer and placed 2 small glass capsules on the table. Cyanide. Eva Braun watched from across the room, her hands shaking. She had chosen to stay with him until the end. Hitler looked at her with a strange softness rarely seen by others. "You may leave if you wish, Eva." Eva shook her head. "I will not leave you. Not now." Outside in the hallway, the staff stood still, listening, understanding what was happening behind the doors. Some cried. Some breathed. Others simply stared at the ground, unable to face the reality. Then Hitler gave his final orders. His body and Eva's must be burned so the Soviets could not display them. The remaining staff should prepare to escape the bunker once everything was over. And no one was to surrender him alive. These instructions marked the final moment of control he would ever have. And the final hours of April 30th. The atmosphere felt frozen. Everyone knew the end was approaching. They waited. They whispered. They paced the narrow hallways, each footstep echoing like a countdown. Hitler returned to his study with Eva Braun. He closed the door behind them, and the world took a breath, waiting for the moment that would change history forever. The bunker had never been so quiet. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The staff stood outside Hitler's study, listening to the heavy silence behind the closed door. It felt endless. The air was thick, and the smell of smoke and dust from the collapsing city seeped in through the concrete walls. Finally, a single, sharp gunshot echoed through the bunker. Everyone froze. For a second, no one breathed. Then the reality hit them like a weight on their chests. Hitler was dead. The man who started a world war, the man whose decisions destroyed millions of lives, had ended his own. General Bergdorf was the first to reach the door. He pushed it open carefully. Inside, the room was dimly lit. Hitler sat on the sofa, a pistol still in his hand. Eva Braun lay beside him, her lips blue from the cyanide she had taken. She looked peaceful, almost as if she was sleeping. Hitler did not. His face was rigid, twisted, the final expression of a man who refused to surrender. The staff stood at the doorway, shocked. Somi cried softly. Others simply stared. "Ma'am, we must follow his orders," someone whispered. With trembling hands, several officers wrapped the bodies in blankets and carried them up the narrow staircase toward the garden above the bunker. Outside, the city was collapsing. Buildings were burning. Soviet shells exploded nearby. Smoke filled the sky. And the garden. They placed the bodies in a shallow crater created by a bomb. They poured gasoline over the blankets. Someone struck a match. The flames rose quickly, flickering in the cold afternoon air. The fire burned hot, twisting the blankets, darkening the shapes beneath them. The staff stood around the burning bodies, watching silently. No speeches. No ceremony. Only fear and exhaustion. Above them, the Soviet army was closing in. Below them, the bunker waited like a tomb. When the fire finally began to die, the officers hurried back underground. The bunker felt smaller than before, almost suffocating. People started preparing to escape or surrender, their futures uncertain. Hitler's death spread through the bunker like a whisper, then a shockwave. Officers packed their bags. Secretaries cried in the hallways. Some soldiers even attempted to flee through the ruins of Berlin, hoping to escape the Soviets. By nightfall, the Third Reich had no leader left, Berlin had no hope left, the war was almost over, and the bunker, once the heart of Hitler's power, became nothing more than a dark, crumbling shelter where frightened people waited for history to crash down on them.